Hello everyone. Today I wanted to talk about cryptocurrencies, which are a killer application of blockchains. So before we get to cryptocurrencies, I wanted to talk a little bit about the history of money. To learn more about this subject, I would recommend highly the videos of Mike Maloney on YouTube, which are titled The Hidden Secrets of Money. So if we go back in time before money came into being, the method of exchange of goods was barter. So let's say that A had some bread with him, and let's say that B had rice with him. Okay, and each wanted the other's goods, so they could exchange it. So A would give some bread to B and he would get some rice in exchange. Okay. So this would work provided, of course, A wanted rice. And that may not be true. So what if he didn't want rice? Let's say he wanted beans instead, but B wanted bread, then this transaction would not take place. Okay. So what we want instead of something like rice is something which could be universally accepted. So we want high acceptability of something which could be used as money, and clearly rice doesn't have that property. So secondly, rice may go bad. Now this is a problem, because if A accepts this rice as a form of money, even if he didn't want rice, let's say he accepted it in the hope of spending it later, let's say giving it to C in exchange for something else. Okay, let's say C gave back beans instead. He couldn't keep the rice for very long because it might go bad. Okay. So in place of rice, we would want something which is durable and also its value is durable. So we want something which is physically durable and in addition it is a good store of value. So a third point is that how much rice would you need in order to buy something? Okay, so suppose A wanted to buy a house from C instead of beans. How much rice would he have to give C? Okay, probably a large quantity. And in that case, he would need a huge amount of rice. Maybe he would have to transport it all the way to where C lives. So rice is not easily transportable. Okay. So what we want of money is that it should be portable. A second or a fourth point really is that the quality of rice is not uniform. So suppose A accepted rice from B and he wanted to use it as money later on, and he takes it to somebody else, let's say to C. C will have to judge the quality of that rice. If 1 kilo of rice is not the same as any other 1 kilo of rice, they could be of different types. Maybe one is basmati, one is not. One is long grained, one is not. Right? Maybe one is older than the other, right? So maybe, I mean, it's hard to judge what is the value of rice because the quality is different. So what we want from money is that the quality should be easily judged. And this property is sometimes called fungibility, or it's really related to the idea of fungibility. So what does fungibility mean? It means that 1 unit of some substance can be exchanged with another unit of that same substance. Let's say with any one other unit of that substance. Okay, so 1 kilo of one particular type of rice cannot be exchanged with 1 kilo of another type of rice. It may be possible that 1 kilo of the same type of rice cannot be exchanged with another kilo of the same type of rice just because one is older or the quality is a little bit better. So rice or bread is not fungible. Then what we want is that we want to be able to spend small quantities of money, and can we spend small quantities of money to buy something small that we want? So can we buy small quantities of something with rice? And I suppose the smallest unit is a grain, so it might be possible with rice. Okay. So what we want ideally of money is divisibility. So that we can divide our money into very small amounts and buy a small quantity of something that we want. So clearly a house wouldn't be a good form of money because we can't divide it, right? So to summarize what we said so far is that the properties of money that we want are universal acceptability, okay, let's just write that down here: acceptability, portability, fungibility, divisibility, and also durability. And let's say that we looked at a few different things in order to see whether they satisfy these properties. So let's say we took rice, let's say it was exchanged in barter, but could it be used as money later on? Is it universally acceptable? Well, not always, so I'll put a question mark there. Some people may not want rice. Is it portable? Well, not really. If you wanted to buy something big, let's say a house or a yacht or something, you wouldn't be able to use rice easily. You'd have to take truckloads of it in exchange for a house. What about fungibility? Can it be divided? I was talking about divisibility. Can it be divisible? Well, I would say yes, not into extremely small amounts, but we can go down up to a grain. So it is divisible, fairly divisible. Is it durable? Well, not quite, because it can go bad. Is it fungible? Can 1 kilo of rice be exchanged for any other 1 kilo of rice? And the answer is no. What if instead of rice, let's say I took something else like a house and I tried to use it as money? Was it portable? Well, clearly it wasn't. Is it acceptable to all? Well, I mean, not everybody wants a particular house that somebody has, so I would say no. Is it fungible? Can it be exchanged for any other type of house? No. Is it divisible? No. Is it durable? Well, probably. I mean, it is a fairly good store of value, maybe for a few decades, but not more than that. So before a good form of money was found, all these properties were not satisfied by anything in particular. So people had to live with barter. Okay, so they did manage to exchange certain things, but the economy couldn't really take off because there was no such thing as no such substance which could act as money. But then as time went on, people discovered precious metals like gold. And so let's see if gold satisfies these properties. So is it acceptable? Well, almost everybody wants gold, so indeed it's acceptable. Is it portable? Well, really yes, because even a small quantity of gold like a kilo can be worth a lot of money. 1 kilo of gold might be worth 50 lakhs of money, which is a decent amount. You could buy even a house with something with enough gold which could fit in your pocket. Okay? So let's say yes. Is it fungible? Is 1 kilo of gold exchangeable for another 1 kilo of gold? And the answer is yes, provided they are of the same purity. Is gold divisible? In fact, it is very divisible. You can go all the way down to an atom if you want, or a nanoparticle, and you can use that to buy something very small, let's say. Right? So it is fairly well divisible. Is it durable? In fact, gold is very, very durable. If you keep a kilo of gold somewhere and keep it there for even thousands of years, it would essentially remain intact. It wouldn't corrode, or it wouldn't melt or anything like that. Right? So gold is highly durable. It's physically durable, and also it's a good store of value because it is very rare in nature. So gold satisfied all the properties of money, and silver also satisfied most of these properties. So if we go back in time to about 600 BC, that was the first time that gold and silver started being used as coins. And in fact, something called electrum was used, which was a combination of gold and silver. So the kingdom of Lydia used this, which was located in what is called Turkey today. So what the Lydians did was that they took these electrum pieces, which was available in fact on the riverbed, okay, and they would take them and they would melt the electrum and form coins, and they would put a stamp on the coins. So why did we need coins, and why couldn't they just exchange pieces of electrum? Because, well, the thing is, people didn't have maybe weighing scales, and they didn't maybe know the purity of the substance. So what the government of Lydia would do by creating coins is to have some sort of a standard. So the stamp of the government on the coins told people what is the quality. It was some guarantee of the quality and the quantity. So people didn't have to take weighing scales around with them, or they didn't have to be expert jewelers who knew all about precious metals. They could just look at the face of the coin and they knew the quality and quantity. Okay? So this was a huge innovation, in fact, in the history of mankind. In fact, the Lydians created what would become money for thousands of years after that. Okay? So gold essentially became a standard of trust for money. We've looked at trust for bitcoins in another lecture, right? But when it came to money, gold was the standard of trust. So these gold coins, of course, were used widely, and it sort of became standard for coins to have either silver or gold in them. Okay. So now I want to fast forward into the first few centuries where we had of AD, after Christ, and I want to go to the Roman Empire. So the Roman Empire was expansionist in its scheme of things, and they were expanding and becoming larger and larger, and the government needed money to undertake these sorts of expansionist schemes or to build big roads and so on. Government needed a lot of money, just like governments do today. So what does the Roman government do? Well, they can't produce gold or silver out of thin air. They had to mine it from places like Spain and so on. So emperors got clever, and what they did was they diluted the amount of gold and silver in coins. So they diluted the gold, silver in coins to create more coins. So this was a trick that they thought was brilliant. You could just put less silver in the coins and create more and more coins, put copper or something else in place of silver, and you can create more money, and that would help you build bigger roads, pay your soldiers and so on. But this backfired, and you might want to think why. So it turns out that money cannot be created out of thin air. Okay, and whenever governments try to do that, it creates problems. And one of the problems is inflation. So the prices rose, And of course the emperors tried to stop this price rise. So there was an emperor called Diocletian, and he tried to have fixed prices. He said if you try to sell bread more than this, then you could be imprisoned or you could even be executed, right? But that didn't solve the problem, because then people just stopped producing bread or whatever they were producing, right? Because what's the point of producing something and you sell it for a price which is lower than your cost of creating, right? So that boomerang, and this weakened the Roman Empire, and the Roman Empire eventually collapsed. One of the reasons was this, right? Because of diluting coins. Okay? So in fact, this was the Western Roman Empire. And of course there may have been many other reasons for the collapse of the empire, but this was clearly one of them. This crazy idea of diluting currency in order to create money out of thin air. Okay. But if we look at the Eastern Empire, so the Roman Empire had split up into two rather big parts. So the Eastern Empire was headquartered at Constantinople, and it's sometimes called the Byzantine Empire. They introduced something called the solidus. It was a gold coin, and it was widely used not just in their empire, but it was trusted so much that it was used outside their empire, and that held their economy in good stead. And in fact their empire lasted for more than 1,000 years. So the Roman Empire, Western Roman Empire, collapsed, let's say 5th century or so, whereas the Eastern Empire lasted to something like 1500 AD, right? Much longer than the Western Empire. And one of the reasons was clearly a better economy because of a better standard of money. So if we fast forward further in time and we look at innovations in money, we come to the year 1717, and we come to somebody very famous whom we all know, Sir Isaac Newton. So Isaac Newton was a very brilliant scientist, but in his later years he ended up as Warden of the Royal Mint. So this was where the coins were made in England. So Isaac Newton was the head of the mint, and he was a very brilliant man, right? So what he noticed was that their gold coins faced the problem of clipping. So what people would do is that if they had a coin, let's say this is a sovereign coin or a guinea coin created by the Royal Mint, what they would do is that they would shave off a part of it, okay, and give off the rest. While spending the amount, they would give a smaller part of the coin away, okay, and shave off a tiny part. So let's say somebody shaved this part off, somebody shaved another part off, and so on, and finally the size of the coin would decrease, right? And because of that, the value of the coin would also go down, because people knew that it didn't really have the original amount of gold that it had in it, right? And with these shavings, of course, people would melt it and sell off the gold for something else, right? So this was in a way some sort of way of diluting the value of the coin. Okay, so it was a big problem for their economy. So value of the coin decreased. So Isaac Newton came up with a brilliant idea, which is called the gold standard. So we know him for other things like calculus and the laws of motion and gravity and so on. right? But we don't know him so well for another big invention which really changed the world in a big way. So what is the gold standard? So the gold standard says that the Royal Mint is going to create notes, which is just paper, which can be exchanged for a certain quantity of gold. Okay, so let's say that the note says that I will exchange 1 ounce of gold if you give it to me, right? So what you do is that if you have such a note, you can always deposit it in the bank and in exchange get some particular quantity of gold which is written on that note. Okay? So this particular note of paper was designed in such a way that it was hard to counterfeit. So it was hard to counterfeit, and in addition to that, it was impossible to do anything like clipping with it. So I'll say just not clippable. Okay, so let's say as an example, let's say that this is 1 ounce, and let's say that the Bank of England or the Royal Mint had 1,000,000 ounces of gold. They could create 1,000,000 of these notes and just circulate these notes. Okay, so if anybody came with a note to the bank, they would exchange it for 1 ounce of gold. So effectively, one note was worth 1 ounce of gold, and it could be exchanged in the market as if it was 1 ounce of gold. So this was called a gold standard, and it replaced physical gold with notes. So this was a brilliant idea, and it was used by England for a long period of time, but in almost the entire Europe, it was used between the period of around 1870 to just before the First World War. So let's say 1940. And this was a time of great stability. There was almost zero inflation. Okay, which is extremely good for the economy, and some of the greatest inventions in science took place in that time. You can think about it, whether it is Albert Einstein's relativity, or whether it was quantum mechanics and so on, right? And physics, chemistry, and also other inventions. Okay? So it was a great time when the gold standard was in effect throughout the world. But then in 1914, we know that the First World War started. And this was a huge disaster for many countries. So they needed a lot of money in order to wage war, and they didn't have as much gold as they needed in order to buy things, to pay troops and to buy arms and so on. So they did what Diocletian did, which was they diluted the money supply, and they sort of printed more notes than gold that they had. So many of them in fact went off the gold standard, and they said, we are not going to exchange notes for gold. I mean, we are just going to print more notes and spend it. Okay? And as you can imagine, this caused inflation. So one of the worst inflations occurred in Weimar, Germany. So Germany lost the First World War, as they did the Second World War, but they lost the First World War in 1918, and they were made to pay a lot of money to other countries as reparations for causing the First World War, right? And of course they didn't have enough money to pay other people, so what they did was printed lots of notes, and there was huge inflation. So between the period of about 1918 to 1921, there was hyperinflation. So huge inflation, and the prices went up by as much as 1 trillion times. So this is huge. So that's 10 to the power of 12 times. Not a billion times, but a trillion times. Okay, so let's say that if you think about it in today's terms, one idli in, let's say, the Crescent building in IIT Bombay would cost 10 rupees, right? If it goes up by a trillion times, you would have to pay 10 trillion rupees just to buy an idli, right? It doesn't make sense at all. And it was a huge disaster for their economy. A lot of people lost their wealth overnight. Many people even committed suicide, right? So this hyperinflation was extremely bad. Okay. So, and as we know, I mean, there were other political problems with this, and we know that Adolf Hitler came to power soon after this. Okay? So anyway, if we fast forward, to around the time of World War II, people tried to get on to some sort of a gold standard at what is called the Bretton Woods Agreement. This happened around 1944 or so. Okay. So at that time the US government had a huge quantity of gold. They had something like 20,000 tons of gold. Okay, the largest gold reserves in the world at that time. So what was decided was that the US dollar could be exchanged for gold. So 35 US dollars was exchangeable for 1 ounce of gold. Okay, so that was sort of like a gold standard, except there was a catch that the US planned to not have enough gold for all their notes. Okay, so they decided on something called a fractional reserve. So what that said is that if they had n ounces of gold, actually ideally if they followed the gold standard, they should have had 35 n US dollars in circulation. Okay, so that they would be able to exchange all the currency for gold. But instead they decided to go beyond that. They said that we will print more than this amount. We will print something like 2.5 times that amount. Okay. So this is called a fractional reserve, that they could print more money than the reserves, the gold reserves that they had. So when would this work? So this fractional reserve idea works if only few people exchange notes, currency for gold. Okay, so if let's say if essentially the idea is that they didn't expect most people to exchange their currency for gold. Let's say that less than 35 N dollars was exchanged for gold, so then of course they wouldn't have any problem. They could always give gold in return. This does not work if let's say everybody comes and tries to exchange their currency for gold, because then the government doesn't have enough gold to exchange. So it does not work if larger than 35 N dollars is exchanged for gold. Okay, so it's always a very dicey thing, and modern day banks also use some sort of fractional reserve. They don't really have as much currency notes corresponding to the amounts mentioned in their bank accounts. Okay, so if everybody tries to exchange, go to the bank, even State Bank of India, and say, give me in physical notes all the money that I have, then the bank would run out of notes very quickly. Okay, something called a bank run. So of course the bank run has nothing to do with the gold standard, but the idea of a fractional reserve is there, which is why it can occur. Okay. So Bretton Woods said that $35 is equal to 1 ounce of gold. And what about other countries? They didn't really have too much gold. So what they said is that they would peg, whether it was the rupee or the British pound, it would be exchangeable for a certain amount of dollars. Okay, certain amount of US dollars. So maybe let's say 10 rupees is equal to 1 US dollar, and the British pound, let's say that half a British pound is equal to $1, right? Whatever they had said, right? So I'm just putting these numbers, okay, some random numbers. Okay. And of course the Indian government would have to ensure, of course that was British India in those days, but the Indian government would have to ensure that they could exchange dollars, they had enough dollars in order to exchange the rupees for that amount, right? So if somebody came with 10 rupees to the Indian government, they would have to be able to produce $1 in return. Okay. And similarly, if somebody came with 1 British pound to the British government, they would have to exchange, they would have to give $2 to that person, right? So effectively the dollar was tied to gold and other currencies were pegged to the dollar. So effectively other currencies too were pegged to the golds in some way, right? So the Bretton Woods continued, the Bretton Woods agreement continued till the 1960s. But in the 1960s, problems started occurring, and one of the geopolitical issues was the Vietnam War. So again, the government of the United States needed a huge amount of money to fight the war. So what did they do? Well, it was the standard trick of printing money. So they created dollars out of thin air and they spent it. Right? And lots of other governments had stored US dollars as their foreign reserves, right? As their reserve currency, which they could exchange with other countries if they wanted to buy something. Now people started getting worried, because if dollars were being printed like crazy, that means their foreign reserves were going to decrease in value because there would be inflation of some kind. Okay? So what other governments, for example the French government said, so they said, here is your dollars, give me gold in exchange, right? And lots of governments started doing that. They gave dollars to the US government and they redeemed gold in exchange. And because of that, the US reserves from 20,000 pounds or so decreased to something like 8,000 pounds. Okay, so effectively the US dollar was losing its value. People were panicking and essentially something like a bank run was occurring. The gold of the US government was disappearing. So what did the US government do? So they panicked, and in the early 1970s, President Nixon went completely off the gold standard. So he really killed the gold standard, and the gold standard hasn't been revived till today. So what we have are fiat currencies. So fiat is a Latin word. It means something like my will, right? So by will, the government can create money. They can create any amount of money at any point in time, right? So any amount of currency can be created at any time, okay, by any government in the world. So the Indian government could create trillions of rupees out of thin air if they wanted to. And of course that is going to cause inflation, right? Which is a big problem with fiat currencies. So one example, if you think of inflation in India, in about the mid 90s, let's say 1985, the smallest unit of currency was 5 paisa. And if you fast forward to, let's say 2015 or even today, the smallest unit of current is 1 rupee. Okay? And this sort of tells you that there's been a huge amount of inflation. The value of currency has decreased by at least 20 times in a matter of a few decades. Okay? And really this has happened because of the nature of fiat currencies. When government needs money to spend, sometimes they just create it out of thin air. Okay? And modern terms used by economists for creating money are things like quantitative easing. Okay, so it's a fancy word. Okay, and essentially the government creates a lot of money, and or the Reserve Bank or whatever the central bank is creates a lot of money and gives it. Sometimes they loan it out and they expect to get back the money. Okay, and that will, of course, getting back the money might decrease the inflation, but it's possible that they may not get the money back ever. Okay, so this is the situation that we are in today. We are in the realm of fiat currencies and high inflation. Now there is a broader term to describe the current monetary system and the techniques used in order to manage it. And this is essentially, the current scheme uses something called MMT, Modern Monetary Theory. So this includes fiat, which is generating currency at will, and it also includes setting interest rates. And this setting is done centrally by central banks. So this would be like the Fed in the US and the RBI in India. Okay? So this modern monetary theory has led to a lot of inflation, and it's also created a lot of bubbles. So even if overall inflation is not too high, it creates localized inflation, which is called bubbles. And you can recall, for example, the dot-com bubble. Then there was a housing bubble in the US. The dot-com bubble occurred in the 1990s, and this happened in the 2000s. Okay. So this current decade we've had a stock market bubble. and this of course has happened in the 2010s. Okay, so it's a precarious situation, and never in history has fiat currencies worked for long periods of time. Okay, they always collapse due to some reason or the other, usually inflation of some kind. So let's think for a moment, why does currency have value? So why does currency have value? And is currency a good form of money? Right, so all of these questions will be relevant to cryptocurrencies, which is why I'm bringing them up now. So what about acceptability? So currency itself doesn't have any intrinsic value, that I'm talking about fiat currency. But the reason it is accepted is because it is artificially created by government laws. So a certain currency has to be used in a particular country in order to buy and sell, and that creates artificial demand for it, and it sort of becomes acceptable because of government rules. Okay, so that's what gives it acceptability. Does it have divisibility? And well, yes, you can spend arbitrarily small amounts of the currency, right? Especially electronically, it can be arbitrarily small. Right? What about fungibility? So is one unit of currency exactly equal to another unit of currency? And the answer is yes. Okay. So let me just write this here. So it's artificially created. The acceptability is artificially created. What about portability? So, well, yes, I mean, for electronic it's trivial. You don't actually have to carry anything, and even if it's physical currency notes, it is fairly portable. What about durability? So currency notes, of course, they are fairly durable, and if it's stored in electronic forms, we could think it's, very, very durable, as long as the electronic records are maintained by the government or a bank and so on. So physical durability is there, but as a store of value, it's not very durable. So this is sorely lacking in current fiat currencies. So can we have alternatives? Now this is a very tricky thing, because normally what is allowed to buy and sell is only currencies approved by the governments, right? And getting past governments is non-trivial, because for currency or for money we need to have some sort of trust, right? And when you looked at gold, it was the physical metal which gave us that trust, but still the government had to come in to say what is the quantity of gold in this coin. We needed a trusted authority to tell us how much quantity was there, and also what is the quality, right? And the physical properties of gold took care of physical durability and divisibility and so on. Okay. But we needed the government even when we were using gold, right? And of course, the government has to come in when we deal with currency, because it is the government which controls the demands, the supply of currency. Okay, so the government controls supply, and it sort of artificially creates demand in some sense by mandating that only that currency has to be used in a particular country. So trying to come up with a currency which is trustworthy and which bypasses the government, or which is alternative to the government, is non-trivial. Okay, and nobody thought it's even possible to do something like this. So this is where Satoshi Nakamoto came in. And nobody knows who Satoshi Nakamoto is. It could be a single individual or a group of individuals, we don't know. But Nakamoto came up with Bitcoin, which is essentially something like a global currency. It can be used for anybody to pay anybody else in the world. Okay. It's a fairly fast transaction, and we look later in the course. Sometimes the transaction has to, you have to take about an hour to be sure that you've received the money. Okay, but researchers are trying to reduce that time significantly. But Bitcoin is an alternative, and it does not have a centralized authority to give it trust. So there is no trusted central authority. So this is huge, to not have a centralized trusted authority and to still have some sort of a monetary system. Okay, so clearly it's a threat to a number of banks or the banking systems worldwide, which is why several countries have banned Bitcoin. Okay, but otherwise, I mean, the ideas are pretty solid, and we'll see in the rest of the course how exactly it works. So what are the building blocks of cryptocurrencies? So first of all, they use cryptography. And it's the mathematics behind cryptography which makes this work. So cryptography essentially brings in some amount of trust. And where do we get decentralization from? Well, that was the technology developed in the 1990s and 2000s, and it's called peer-to-peer networking. So this brings in decentralization. Okay, so it's a non-trivial problem to solve, because one of the things we need in currency is a property called no double spend. And it really means that you should not be able to spend your money twice. Should not be able to spend the same money twice. And how is this solved with, for example, gold? Well, because once you've given the gold coin to somebody, it's gone. You can't re-spend that gold coin. And what about currency? So if it's a currency note, once you handed it to somebody, it's gone. You can't re-spend it twice. Okay? And if it is electronic, then the banks have to ensure that the currency cannot be spent twice. So banks have to ensure this. Okay, so preventing the double spend is extremely critical in any currency system. So how did Satoshi manage to solve this? So let's say that there are different users. There's A, B, C, D and so on. Let's say we have several of them. So these could be in any part of the world, not necessarily localized to a particular country. And what Satoshi did is he used a blockchain in order to record the current amounts or balances that different users have. Okay. So he invented blockchain, even though I'm presenting his work much after other examples. Satoshi was the one who invented blockchains for Bitcoin. Okay, so it starts with the Genesis block, as we've seen in other examples, and then blocks keep getting added and so on. Okay. So suppose A wants to pay B, let's say 5 Bitcoin. Okay. So what would he do? He would create a transaction which is just a bit string which has this information. So the exact format, of course, is a little bit intricate, but the information it contains is something like this. A pays B, right, 5 Bitcoin. Okay. And of course this transaction has to be properly signed by A. Okay. So this particular transaction might go into a block. Let's say this is the new block created. I am just zooming into what this block might contain. So it contains a list of transactions which have been recently created. So let's say that this one has gone in over here, right? And there could be many other transactions in the block, right? And it gets in there, and once it gets into a block, we know that because the blockchain is tamper proof, it's final. Okay, so recall that the blockchain is tamper proof. So the procedure is as follows. So the steps to be followed for A to pay B is, first of all, A creates the transaction. And then he broadcasts the transaction in the network. So there's this peer-to-peer network among the various users. So peer-to-peer works don't have a centralized authority. Everybody is a peer, everybody is an equal, right? And they're connected to each other in some way, right? And any message sent by anybody can be broadcast to everybody else. So for example, if A is creating the transaction, he could send it to B and E, and they themselves would send it to others, and the message would reach everybody, right? Then something called a consensus protocol is run, and this consensus protocol is going to collate a number of pending transactions into a block. Okay. And it's going to decide, it's going to help everybody decide what exactly is going to be the next block added to the blockchain. Okay, so let's say that we were at a particular point. Let's say that we were over here. This was the end of the blockchain. And then the consensus protocol would be run. And let's say that we ended up with this particular block in which everybody agreed to. Okay, so all agree on the next block. So once we have consensus, everything is sort of cast in stone because of the tamper-proof nature of blockchains. So this block has been finalized and the transaction is in there, so everybody knows that it is going to be there forever. Okay. So the blockchain acts as a record of transactions, and essentially the list of transactions all the way from the Genesis block up to here are going to decide what is the balance that anybody has, how much Bitcoin somebody has. So clearly A cannot spend this Bitcoin twice. Once he's paid it to B, everybody essentially knows that he doesn't have that 5 Bitcoin anymore and he cannot spend it twice. Okay. So the main invention of Satoshi Nakamoto, of course, was, besides just the blockchain, was the consensus protocol, and it's called proof of work. So this problem was considered unsolvable by the computer science community for various reasons, because of the consensus protocols that people had before. But Satoshi was able to solve it in a brilliant way. Okay, so it essentially allows anybody to be part of the network. You or I, anybody can anonymously join, and still everybody could agree on what is the contents of the next block. Okay, so it's a brilliant system, and it's not very difficult actually. Once you see the solution, it will look desperately simple, but proving that it works, and of course it has worked for more than 10 years now, but proving theoretically that it works is non-trivial. Okay. So Satoshi invented proof of work and the blockchain data structure, right? And both of them are tightly coupled to each other. Okay. And we'll see how this works in the future lectures.